On today's March and Toss Shenanigans, we're going to be celebrating the return of a machine to my collection. Not the exact machine I had, but it's a complicated story, so bear with me while I try to tell it over and over until I get it right eventually. Back in 2017 or so, Ryan and I, which, Ryan, he needs no introduction on this channel, really. He's a good friend of mine, has done countless stuff, and if you're newer to the channel and aren't aware of who he is, his name's Ryan Garrett. He also has appeared very much. I have actually a vlog collection from many, many years ago when we actually used to hang out with another friend of ours. So it's a really good introduction to who he is if you're newer to the channel. Anyway, we were told of the existence of some Macs going to e-waste about 6 hours south of where we are. Ryan was able to get some time off work, so both of us went down there. I drove one of his cars, he drove the other, to go pick up a bunch of vintage Macs. Now, all of these were of the 68K variety. Apparently there were some PowerPC ones that had already been taken, Centrus 610s, there were quite a few 2SIs, two of which I still have, one of which I'm actively working on as we speak, and two other legendary machines, the Quadra 700. Now, this machine is known for being in Jurassic Park, from what I understand. I'm not a movie person, so I personally can't tell you, but that's what I've been told. And I had one of the Quadra 700s for a good long while, from 2017 up until 2020. Well, as luck would have it, something went horribly wrong in the beginning of 2020, and I'm not talking about the Panini. What ended up happening was my girlfriend's iPhone was starting to kind of suffer the effects of a bad battery. It started shutting down prematurely. It started throttling itself. For Valentine's Day, I decided to be nice and buy her a new battery for her phone and put it in. Well, as I was doing so, there's a teeny weeny little capacitor, resistor, surface mount component of some sort right next to the battery connector. And if you're not careful, you will tear that component right off the board with very little resistance. And that's exactly what happened. And when that component is torn off, the battery doesn't work right. It can't read the battery, so it just will not charge the battery. It'll just keep shutting itself down. So I had to temporarily get the phone working and get the data off of it, and I had to sell off the Quadra 700 to help fund getting a replacement phone for my girlfriend because, well, that was on me. I screwed up. And thankfully, between that and a friend stepping in to help us, my girlfriend was able to upgrade from a original iPhone SE up to an iPhone 11 that she still uses to this very day. And what was funny is I actually sold that very Quadra 700 to a guy from Netflix because I live not terribly far from Netflix HQ. And actually, I had it listed for about $100. I posted on the Vintage Apple subreddit seeing if there was any interest, and the guy accepted it, but then when he showed up to come buy it, or when I showed up to go sell it to him, he was like, here's $200. I cannot in good conscience take this machine off you for what you asked because it's worth so much more money. And given at the time I was still trying to fund getting the phone for my girlfriend, well, I was not exactly in a position to decline his very generous offer. So very, very nice of him. I'm very, very happy with how that went. But in a slight way, I kind of regret selling that Quadra 700 even though it had to happen the way it did, because it was a really fully loaded machine. I believe it had 32 megabytes of RAM, which is pretty decently high for a Quadra, at least that vintage. It had the 1 gigabyte hard drive, which still worked, shockingly, and it had maxed out VRAM. Very, very nice for a machine of that vintage. That machine gone, I kind of slowly started getting back into retro tech, and that's kind of my identity now. And I still kind of think back to that machine because I'm like, I really kind of regret selling it off. I really miss it in a way. Well, enter Ryan, who still has a Quadra 700. He's actually downsizing his retro collection, not necessarily retro, and he's actually transitioning over to having compact Macs and other oddball Macs, not things like the Quadra 700, which are more like a traditional tower computer that requires its own monitor and keyboard and all that wonderful stuff that takes up quite a bit of room. So he said, hey, I'm getting rid of a bunch of stuff. Like, do you just want the Quadra 700 and this Dell machine I have? And I was like, heck yeah, I want it. Don't mind if I do. So he just handed it off to me. And, well, it's been in my collection for quite a bit, but here it is. Oh boy, still a little bit heavy. But yeah, this is the Quadra 700, and unlike my original Quadra 700, the case badge is actually still fully intact. Because on mine, it was gone. It looked like it was never there, but if you looked, you can kind of see the faint outline of the Quadra 700 logo. But yeah, very nice to have this back in my collection because it's a pretty cool machine. Now, this thing had a few little issues with it. The first one that I knew about, and it kind of came like this from the Paladin Max that we saved, it had this RAM in it. This is a giant Kingston RAM card. One of these is 16 megabytes and it had 4 of them in it. So it had 4 of those, and that's kind of a problem because if we open the machine up here, unlike the other machines in the Mac 2 series, you can kind of make out the RAM slots are under the drive carrier. So, because of those RAM sticks being so high, the original owner of this machine actually deleted the floppy drive for more RAM. A bold move. I mean, arguably you could get away with it on this machine, but we'll talk more of that later. But yeah, very interesting move, and I decided with the help of Garth Beagle, once again, he actually gave me some RAM to put into this very machine. It doesn't actually have very much RAM, and I believe it has 8 megabytes plus the 4 that's on board, so 12 megabytes, such that System 7.6 still gets a little angry about it at times. Again, it has low profile RAM, so now I put the floppy drive back in it, and I had to source my own because the original one in this machine is long gone. But yeah, now we have a floppy drive that works perfectly fine in this machine once again. As we can see here, this is the original power cable, and that's because I've replaced the hard drive that failed with a BlueSCSI. Very, very nice little solution, especially for people like me who can't afford a lot of money to throw into these things. The BlueSCSI is a very nice little solution. I actually built these myself, so very, very, very happy with how it turned out, and this machine runs pretty nicely. Sadly, I have a overkill 32 gigabyte card in here because you can't really get anything smaller than a 32 gigabyte card these days. But I guess we shouldn't be getting too carried away with ourselves here because we haven't even talked about the ports yet. On the back, trying to make this as less awkward as I can here, we have the monitor ports, we have the SCSI ports, we have the AAUI port, of which you can put a dongle in here, and it'll give you Ethernet access. And that's how I assume they got away with no floppy drive in here. They just connected it up to a network and file shared stuff to this Quadra. We have the 2 serial ports here, printer and modem, 2 ADB ports, this thing was packing, sound output, sound input, and 2 slot blanks for the new bus slots. Let's rotate this thing back around. And this machine is very easy to service, as you could probably already tell. But anyway, before we get into that part, we have the power supply, the drive cage, as already mentioned, the 68040 processor. These are the 2 new bus slots, obviously, but the PDS slot, which if you have a PowerPC upgrade for one of these, which you can get, Action Retro actually did that, you can put a PowerPC CPU in here, which that would be awesome. I would love to put a PowerPC CPU in here, but yeah, that's never going to happen. I should probably never say never at this point, but yeah. So another fun thing is this is a BlueSCSI 1.1. I did have to make a small modification to the case for it. However, it supports a activity LED, and the Quadra case actually has a provision for one. So I crudely stuffed one in there, and it kind of works, but I need to really think up of a better solution here because it's barely visible, but it is somewhat visible. So the other thing that I've done here is a modification I highly suggest you make if you own one of these machines, and that is just, whoop, there's the power supply. I've been working on this, so that's why doesn't have any screws in it at the moment. But there's a clip that goes on this, just throw the thing out. It's going to make your life so much easier. Okay, so let's talk about the power supply, because this is something, it still stinks. Because I was testing this thing out with the BlueSCSI like a few months ago when I bought my first BlueSCSI. And actually, after I got it running, because the hard drive died, I was like, yay, it works. I'm going to go grab lunch. I left the thing plugged in while I was out. I come back to my room smelling like something had caught fire, and sure enough, after I'd opened the power supply up, I found that the REFA capacitors had blown up. And you can actually just remove them and it will not harm the machine whatsoever. It'll cause some RF interference, I believe. I can't remember specifically what happens, but it will not be a detriment to the machine to run it with the reefa caps completely removed, and that's actually what I've done here. Because again, I don't really want to have to go tracking them down because the part numbers are so generic that it's hard to find drop-in replacements, at least trying to find known good drop-in replacements for them. I eventually want to, but I've looked around and just, again, reefa, or whoever owns that name now, they use the same part number for so many different capacitors, so it's hard to find the right ones, at least when I was looking. I may be wrong on this. But as you can tell, no electrolytic capacitors, none at all. Very, very nice. So this machine does not need a recap. The only recap it could possibly need is in the PSU itself, but again, it's still running perfectly fine, so no point to that, right? And the drive cage just comes out by squeezing this little part here and pulling it back. There is a screw down here, but in most cases, I've never seen that screw actually installed. So I usually just leave it out because this machine holds itself together fairly well with the cover on, so it just makes getting in and out of it so much easier. And with that screw removed, it makes it truly toolless. Then under here is the floppy drive, of which it is a 1.44 meg drive, and it works perfectly fine after a bit of cleaning and some lubrication. I do have 2 of the VRAM SIMs installed here. I believe that gives us 1 megabyte of video RAM because they're both 256K and there's 512 on board if I remember correctly. And we do have a ROM SIM slot here, but even though this thing actually has a ROM on board, not sure what the point of that is. I'm pretty sure someone will tell me down in the comments. Anyway, let's go ahead and get the power supply back in and let this thing have a bit of a rip. Now, I am looking for better RAM for this thing because I would love to max this thing out. But unfortunately, this RAM, again, I want to have a floppy drive in here. I don't know why I'm weird like that, because I could just hook it up to the network and be done with it. But I want my floppy drive, damn it. So I'm on the prowl for some lower profile RAM, and I think I've got a lead on some. So very, very happy about that at the very least. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this thing closed back up, and we'll connect it up to some video and fire it on up.